Hi, this is Russ Walden with Father's Heart Ministry. The word of impartation that I have for you today is found in Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. One of the most compelling verses in the narrative of Abraham. Genesis 15:1, God appears to Abraham. He said, after all these things, what things? After all what things? I'm going to talk about that. The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision saying, fear not, Abraham, I am your shield, I'm your defender, and I'm your exceeding great reward. And that word reward there means salt, or where we get the word salary. You ever have somebody say, are you worth your salt? We're going to talk about that. See, this verse comes after Abraham rescued his nephew Lot, who had been taken captive. And in the process of liberating Lot, Abraham had secured the spoil of 10 cities that the army that held Lot hostage had captured from the plain of Sodom, the valley of Sodom. And so here Abraham is. He has Lot, which is the only reason he went into battle. But he also has, can you imagine, if you live in a small town, can you imagine having the wealth of just your little small town? Now imagine having the wealth of 10 cities. See, God is always the God of more than we might expect. He got Lot back, which is what he wanted, but then he has the wealth of 10 cities. But what happens next? The king of Sodom is coming to meet Abraham, and Melchizedek, God's representative, meets Abraham and says, don't you take anything from the king of Sodom. He'll say he made you rich. So God required Abraham to give all of that back. Now, can you imagine? He'd already been promised that everything he could see was going to be given to him. Do you ever get in a place where you feel like the prophetic word God gave you is coming to pass, and then you have a reversal and it didn't come to pass? That is surely how Abraham felt. Here, God promised him everything that he could see, north, south, east, and west, and now with only 318 armed servants, he captures the wealth of 10 cities. And he is Abraham the Magnificent. He has fulfilled and walked into the fulfillment, he thought, of everything God promised. And then God says, au contraire, give all that back, just like God promised Abraham a son. And then he required him to take him and give him back, to sacrifice him back, and stopped him just at the last minute. And now, so he said, give it all back. And in the process of doing, God shows up and says, look, Abraham went home empty-handed after a miraculous victory. Can you imagine seeing a prophetic word and you're thinking the most powerful word you ever got come fully to pass, and then God says, go home empty-handed. And so God says, fear not. What was Abraham afraid of? He'd had it all, and then he didn't have it. And what's he concerned about? Money. He's concerned about the wealth that he had just relinquished, and he comes home with nothing. And God says to Abram, as he says to us, Abraham, I'm your reward. Abraham, I'm your paycheck. And we find as we read the life of Abraham, there's one place where it says he was rich. He was very rich in goods and gold and flocks and servants. He went out, he knew not where, but it worked out really good for him because of the wealth that came to him. And the scripture plainly tells you that you are a recipient through Jesus of the blessings of Abraham. I was reading a scripture yesterday where God told the nation of Israel that prosperity would flood over it like an overflowing river. I declare the overflowing river of God's prosperity over your life today. God is your salary. He's your exceeding great, more than enough provision. And in the midst of that, Abraham, he took of the spoil before he gave it all back to the king of Sodom, and he gave 10% of what he was going to give back to the king of Sodom to Melchizedek. People talk about, tithing is not just under the law. Tithing was before the law, yes. So let's tithe like Abraham did. He gave 10% to God and then gave the other 90% back to the guy who thought he was his employer. Can you imagine cashing your check, paying your tithes, and then going to the human resources on your job and handing them the other 90% back, say, what are you doing this for? Just to remind you you're not my source. You may think that sounds crazy, but the first time I preached this, I had a young lady who was a legal secretary for the most prominent attorney in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And she did just that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And you'd be astounded how God blessed her. And one of the things that God blessed her with, she desired to be married and have children. And at the end of that time that she was making this supernatural step, she met the man who would become her husband. And she had many, many children. That God rewarded her just as God rewarded Abraham, just as God will reward you. Take a step of faith today. Mix this word with some faith and act upon it. Am I God's representative? There are many of God's representatives. Yes, you could give to Father's Heart Ministry, and you should, because when I give to you of spiritual things, it's only fitting, the scripture says, that you sow back of natural things, but be led by the Spirit and see what God does. Go to fathersheartministry.net, subscribe to the Daily Prophetic Word. Use the text to give information on your screen. I'm here to be the prophet in your life.